So welcome to our YouTube channel. My name is Matt Hume. I wanted to take a moment to just address some of the questions that we get as architects all the time. And we understand that it's pretty rare that people get to work with an architect. You know, if you're lucky, you might build one single building in your lifetime. If your job is associated with, healthcare or something like that, maybe you would work on with an architect on a larger scale project, but that's pretty rare as well. So we understand that, working with an architect doesn't happen very often. It's not like going to your doctor, which you do consistently every year. We wanted to just take a moment to put out some of the questions that we get often and just give our responses to that in hopes that it'll help you understand the world of architecture a little bit better. So the first question that we often get is, what is an architect? And this is, a complicated thing to answer, but I would say, apart from the design aspect of things, one of the most important things an architect does is guarantee life safety. Design is an important part of that, conceptual design, but life safety is probably the most important. We want to make sure that any buildings that are built so that people don't have to be at risk of dying or getting hurt while using them. And that has a lot to do with the codes and regulations involved with designing a building. Corridors have to be a certain width. They have to be they have a maximum length to them. There has to be a certain number of egress paths. There's just a lot to the life safety thing that we have to make sure is taken care of. Conceptual design is a very important part of it. Most people, when they think of an architect, I think they think of that aspect to it. It can be often misconstrued as like the frivolous, subjective part of architecture. But in the world of architecture, that core design competency or understanding is really important. We consider a lot of things when we design a building. First, when you enter a site, where does light, air, and view come from? When you're occupying the building, how does the building respond to the inhabitant? How does it respond to the site? How does it greatly improve your happiness and health over the long term? Energy efficiency is also an important part of this that's sort of linked to the codes and regulations. It has to perform in such a way, so that you're not going to break the bank being able to live in this thing or occupy it, and it's really going to keep you happy and healthy for the long term. And then another thing is budgeting. Budgeting is really important. Architects work to refine the budget at the very onset of the project. Your architect should be discussing, how much you have planned for this project. And oftentimes there's a lot of reality that we have to bring into the conversation with our owners who haven't done a lot of building. They often think it's going to cost a lot less than it actually does. And it's important to keep the budget discussion going throughout the course of the design project. So in a nutshell, an architect is somebody that has really good core design competency. They are very much on top of the codes and regulations that have to do with energy efficiency and life safety, just to name a couple. And then keeping your budget in alignment as you plan to do the project. The next question that we often get is, how much does an architect cost? And I would say that really depends on the project. So, whether you're doing a residential project or a medium commercial or large scale commercial project. But I think a good range is between 3 and 8% of the total construction cost. Some types of buildings can change that. Like if you're in the healthcare sector and you're building hospitals, that can be upwards of 10 to 12%. But for the most part, that range of 3 to 8 is workable. It also depends a lot on the type of construction project it is. So if it's a home and you're looking for just a basic set of drawings to be able to get your building permit, that's obviously going to be on the lower end of the spectrum. But if you're looking for a partner, and I know I myself as an architect, When we get involved in a project, that's really what we're interested in, is partnerships where people understand, owners understand the true value of our expertise. And we kind of guide them start to finish through the project, from initial concept phases all the way through construction. So that's kind of a range of what an architect would cost. And, so for example, on a $400,000 house, if you're working with an architect and they're asking for 5% of the total construction cost, that would be about a $20,000 investment in the planning and architectural phase in the beginning. But you're going to want to really carefully sit down with your architect and say, hey, what is the scope of work? What are we getting for this percentage? How are those payments made? Oftentimes it's broken down into smaller progressive payments over the course of a design project, and that's basically how architects get paid. So another question that we often get is, how long does the process take? Again, that really depends on the size of the project, but we really like to set a schedule and we set expectations in the beginning. Most architects, I believe, operate in the same way. But if you're looking at a smaller scale residential project like a new home, I would say 4 to 6 months is a reasonable amount of time, even upwards of a year depending on the size of the home. I'm always happy when people come to us about a year in advance of wanting to build their home, because we know that gives us plenty of time to be able to flesh out the design and not rush through it and to do a good job. Larger commercial projects can take upwards of a year or two, depending on the size. So yeah, that's about how long it takes. Another question that we often get is, what is the process like? So with our projects, we usually like to set a project schedule in the beginning, and that has a lot to do with, like I said, the type of project and the size of the project. But usually we like to set up either weekly or bi-weekly meetings with our clients. Those can be either in person or they can be remotely via Zoom or something like that. We like to kind of set up checkpoints along the way. So we'll meet consistently every week or every other week, depending on how the project schedule shakes out. But a design really is broken down into phases to help simplify things a little bit. So the first phase of any design project is schematic design, and that's where you're looking at the overall size, shape, and placement of the building, and you're kind of developing the core concepts or guiding principles for the design of the building. The next phase is design development. That's where you are looking at the design in more detail. So you're starting to make some decisions in terms of what the materials are, what is the roof, what is the flooring, what is the siding going to be, and you start to flesh out those details. The third phase is construction documents. That's where us architects, we put our nose to the grindstone and we really work on getting the permit drawings completed, and we start soliciting bids for the construction project from potential builders. And then the fourth phase is construction. So that's where we're working with the owner. We've decided who the builder is going to be, and then we do special inspections over the course of the construction project, and we do requests for information, some additional details about the design, and we check progress points for the building project along the way. And at the end of each one of those phases, we like to sort of have a progress point or a checkpoint. So at the end of schematic design, we like to put together a schematic design packet, and we say, okay, these are all the decisions that we made during this initial phase, and we get a sign off from the homeowner. And usually that's pretty easy to do because we've been working pretty closely with them along the way. And then we do the same thing at the end of design development, and then construction documents, we review them in detail with the owner before doing the final touches on those. So that's what the process is like. So that leads us to the final question, is why should I hire an architect? Obviously, as an architect, I believe it's very important, but it's important in many ways because you're looking for their expertise. architect has been through extensive amount of schooling. Most architects have to go to school at a minimum to get their master's degree. So that would be a minimum of 4 years of undergrad, 2 years for their master's degree. They have to pass the ARE examinations. That can be very time intensive as well. It's about 5 exams, and it takes at least a few months to prepare for each one of those exams. And architects are required to go through continuing education. So we have a minimum of 36 in New York State anyway. We have a minimum of 36 continuing education credits that we have to go through every 3 years. So there's quite a bit of time invested into keeping up with all of the regulation updates, all of the code updates, keeping your design skills honed. You know, there's a lot that we invest in terms of time and effort into that. And you have to have a minimum of 3 years of internship. So when you add all of that up, it's a good 10-year investment into becoming an architect. And it depends on the architect. You know, some people take longer than that. Some people can sort of collapse that into a subtly smaller time scale, but for the most part, you're developing an expertise, a professionalism that's going to sort of really help any owner make sure their building is being done right. And then I think it's important to find somebody you enjoy working with when you hire an architect. You gotta sort of find somebody that you can communicate really well with, that wants to take the time and effort to understand what your objectives are for the project, and you don't mind meeting with on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to flesh out all the ideas and come up with something really cool. So yeah, I think that's the really important part of an architect. And besides, you need an architect. You have to have them to sign off on your building permit drawings, and you might as well enjoy the process along the way.